Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the final session of the Confluence, and a very, very enlightening and significant one. It is themed Managing Other People's Money as a Business, the Chase for Outperformance. And we have a very esteemed panel lined up for you. Let me take the privilege of introducing them. We have with us Mr. Hiren Ved, who is the co-founder and CIO of Alchemy Capital. He started his career by working with KR Choksey and Company, a sell-side firm known for its value investment approach, and eventually graduated to become the firm's head of research. He brings over 2 decades of experience in bottom-up stock picking, managing portfolios, and managing a high-performance investment team capable of delivering consistent, superior alpha. Welcome, Mr. Hiren Ved. We have with us Mr. Bharat Shah, who is the Executive Director of ASK Group. He's a qualified in finance from IIM Calcutta, having topped the class in finance. He comes armed with over 30 years of experience in the Indian capital markets with deep interface in Indian corporate world. He also represents comprehensive insights in Indian capital markets with strong emphasis on bottom-up investment philosophy. He has considerable understanding of global businesses, and stock picking is his special strength. The investment philosophy emphasizes buying only quality businesses, enjoying superior growth but at reasonable valuations. Warm welcome to you, Mr. Shah. We have with us Mr. Saurabh Mukherjee, and Mr. Mukherjee is the founder and CIO of Marcellus Investment Managers, which started to manage money in 2018. Now, Mr. Mukherjee was educated at the London School of Economics, where he earned a BSc in economics with first-class honors and an MSc in economics as well. Mr. Mukherjee is a CFA charter holder and a SEBI registered investment advisor. And in 2017, upon SEBI's invitation, he joined SEBI's Mutual Fund Advisory Committee. He has co-authored many popular books, and under his leadership, Marcellus became one of the top performing PMS and also one of the most popular PMSs too. A warm welcome to you, Mr. Mukherjee. And ladies and gentlemen, with that, let me now take the privilege of introducing our moderator for this panel, Mr. Nimesh Mehta. And he comes armed with more than 21 years of experience in industries ranging from NBFC equities, asset management, and financial services. He is an author of an international bestseller book on Amazon titled Sales Booster. Mr. Nimesh Mehta currently heads the business development, products, and sales at ASK Investment Managers. His business acumen has helped ASK Investment Managers become one of the largest PMS managers in India. He's a commerce graduate, an MBA, and certified financial planner. A very warm welcome to you, Mr. Mehta. The proceedings are now all over to you. Sir.
Thank you, Aishwarya, and thank you, PMS AIF World, for giving me this opportunity. I'm fortunate to have the 3 founders of PMS business on the panel today. The 3 of them represent the top 5 to 6 PMS managers in the country. We have a very differentiated topic today for our discussion, that is managing other people's money, which is the business side of it, and the chase for outperformance, which is the investment side of it. And we rarely get the esteemed speakers like the 3 gentlemen to discuss this subject. So let me get started immediately. So Bharat, one of the perceptions investors and distributors have is when the AUM goes up, the fund manager loses the ability or the flexibility of doing things. He can't buy the businesses or the stocks or the companies he would have bought otherwise. The second perception is when the AUM rises, the performance tends to dip down. Now, you run the largest PMS house domestically with more than 25,000 crores of PMS assets. And you also run one of the largest single PMS strategy, Indian entrepreneur portfolio, with more than 15,000 crores of assets. Please share your thoughts on the 2 perceptions of the investor. And second, what are the challenges you have faced in managing the business side and investment side of it in the last 2 decades?
Okay. Thank you, Nimesh. Coming to the first question first. Whether with the scale opportunities diminish or returns diminish, and I think neither. Opportunities are galore, and I think to say that with relatively modest size of assets that all of us are managing a few $billion here and there. To talk about diminishing opportunities or diminishing returns is an act of self-admittance of guilt or incomprehension of the opportunity before us. So I think neither of them makes any meaningful sense to me. Unless your business is buying, kind of businesses where market cap is few hundred crores or some micro investments of that kind, sure, you'll quickly reach a limit if that is all that you can hope to include in your portfolios, or that is all that you can find around. But opportunity is immense. I mean, this is a market of $3 trillion. And I have no doubts that it will be some 6 trillion and 10 trillion and more. And if in a market of this size, it's a few billion dollars each under management by any one of us. If we talk about limiting, then I think limitations lie within rather than without. So I simply don't understand the question, because I neither find any reduction in number of opportunities, nor do I believe or find that there is anything which has happened whereby you can't really improve the returns or maintain the returns along with the scale. Typically, if you look at the kind of businesses that we've invested in, the businesses have become bigger over a period of time. So they have grown in the size and character both over a period of time. These are essentially compounding machines. So it is not as if if the underlying businesses themselves are limited by their own opportunity or their caliber or their desire to get that size for themselves. Why should we as investors get limited by that? I mean, if Bajaj Finance 10, 12 years back was about 4,500 crore market cap company, and today it is some 370,000 crore company, the investment has grown, the business itself has grown. If you look at a company like Page Industries 10 years back, which was at a market cap of some 1,000 crore, and today it is at some 35,000 crore. The business has grown, the value has grown, our investments have grown along with it. And I can give you dozens of illustrations of this kind where companies have grown. I mean, a company like Asian Paints has gone up some 1,100 times in a matter of 30 years. These kind of opportunities, if we really have a mind to find and to be patient and to be growing with them, I see no dearth of opportunity. Coming to the second issue, what was the second issue that you asked me?
The perception investor always feels when the AUM rises, the performance tends to dip down, is what the general perception has been there.
No, I think that I answered. I think you made a second point thereafter.
Yeah, the second point I was trying to say that how have you managed both the business side and investment side over the last 2 decades?
Sure. In terms of the performance part, I'll repeat, I see no reason why performance should diminish with the growth of the assets, especially at current tiny size of money that all of us are managing. If that is happening, then I think it is an individual case or individual limitation, but I don't think it is limited by the opportunity.
Sure.
In terms of managing the business and your duty as an investment manager, there is no confusion to my mind. As a business owner, my interest would be to see that the size of the business grows, the profits grow, and therefore the value of the investment in the business grows. But it will be foolish on my part to think that that can happen without being mindful of the interests of the investors or the customers. And I think even apart from the economic interest logic, I would say first and foremost, my duty is to the clients as a trustee. And unless I understand that responsibility, uphold it in its entirety, and reinforce it with the conduct, there is no way of getting to a bigger business. Therefore, again, this is a confusion in the minds of the people. First thing comes first, client interest under any circumstance under any situation is the first and foremost. And that trusteeship responsibility is something that you cannot take lightly. I regard that for my own money, I have a trusteeship responsibility, because when I manage my money and my own money, the two things are kind of isolated. Like a company is an artificial entity and the promoter is individuals. Similarly, for your own money, you have a trusteeship responsibility. That responsibility to somebody else's money is even higher. And therefore, that is the first responsibility in true sense one has to discharge. All other things will happen automatically. It's a byproduct. So again, I see no confusion there in either of them.
Thank you, Bharat Bhai, for that elaborate answer. Hiren Bhai, you have built Alchemy business over the last 2 decades with utmost care and trust of the investors. What has been your experience of building a business in the ups and downs of the AUM cycles?
Well, I think if you allude to scale, I think I agree with Bharat Bhai, and I think in the overall scheme of things, our AUMs are really small. Let me give you an example. When I started the PMS business in 2002, there were precisely 21 companies in India which had a market cap in excess of 1 billion. And that time 1 billion was like 4,000 crores or 3,800 crores, right? Today, there are at least 300 companies which have a market cap in excess of $1 billion. So the opportunity set itself has increased, right? I think we still, if you take the mutual fund industry and the PMS industry also together, I still feel that that money management as a business is still a very small proportion of of the total market cap. And I think that what we call as scale from a portfolio manager's perspective is still, I don't think we've reached that levels where, for example, in the US, there were more number of mutual funds than number of listed companies at one point in time, right? So I don't think we've reached anywhere near there when it comes to size constraints.
Sure.
Because the market itself has grown, the companies have grown, and we've grown with them, and we are still a very small proportion of the overall market cap. I think if you ask me as a portfolio manager, we have also evolved, over the years. Every portfolio manager who comes, at least I can talk of myself, when we come in, we want to differentiate compared to others. The myth you have is that, look, the investor can always invest in an HDFC Bank or an Infosys. He doesn't need me to do that. And therefore, you go out and you want to find the next Infosys. And then over time, you realize that there is no next Infosys. There is only one Infosys. There is only one HDFC Bank. There's only one Asian Paints. Yes, what you do learn over a period of time is there are certain attributes that make a successful business. And you learn from the attributes of great companies like these. And then over time, across businesses, you look for certain attributes like that in several other businesses. And that's what you try to replicate, right? I mean, for example, Bharat Bhai mentioned about Bajaj Finance. I think the first time we invested in Bajaj Finance was in early 2010, when the market cap was 1,450 crores. And the stock was available at less than 1 time price to book. There was no street research available on the company. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, there was only one mutual fund who used to own that stock at that time. And there was very little following. And it was just one amongst the many businesses which were listed, right? And this was happening when there were significantly well-known banks like ICICI, HDFC, Kotak, who were still there. But there was still an opportunity, right, over there, which is that the opportunity was significantly large. The team had a very different strategy to access the opportunity, and they scaled the business phenomenally. I think it's a, to hit upon something like a Bajaj Finance is a portfolio manager's dream, right? And it's 100x for our original client, right? So I think that we all come and think that we want to find the next Bajaj Finance, but it's a game that you play. When I say game, not in a derogatory sense, but this is a process where along the way you will find new entrepreneurs, great opportunities, and you try to see some of your learnings that you've seen, and you try to find the same attributes that you find in some of these leading companies in the next generation of entrepreneurs and opportunities. And that's how you evolve over a period of time. And lastly, a point I want to make is that, see, I think as India, we have global aspirations as a country.
Yeah.
I think we are a $3 trillion market cap. It's not inconceivable to think that we will be 10 trillion in a couple of years down the line as our economy grows.
Yeah.
And I think what we call large caps in the Indian context are actually mid caps or micro caps in the global context. Look at the market caps of some of the best leading companies around the world, right? And I mean, now reaching a $1 trillion market cap is something that a lot of companies around the world are aspiring to be. So I think that we should not get constrained. And it is oft said in the markets that elephants can dance. So it's not as if that there is opportunity across all kinds and shapes and sizes of businesses. But, our elephants are still baby elephants in the global scale.
Just a quick point to what Hiren mentioned, if I'm...
Yeah.
He said that investing is a game and not in a derogatory sense. But indeed, investing is a game. It is a game that you are playing with the rules, with the right ethics, and with the right discipline. And if you play it by the rules and with the correct attitude and correct behavior, that's a game that you're playing to improve your odds, to improve your chance of success. Ultimately, it's a game where you're constantly trying to improve the probability of the success compared to probability of it not working as well as you thought. That is the game, and that is the game that investing is all about. And I'm in fact, in a very laudatory way, say that it's a beautiful game to play.
I think great wisdom by the two gentlemen. Saurav, I think this is the third time moderating a panel with you, and it's my pleasure. Saurav, a question for you is, Marcellus has scaled up to 5,000 crores AUM in a very short time in the last couple of years. So how difficult was it to manage as per the investment philosophy or product philosophy when flows are coming in at the fastest pace? And again, the same question, how the managing between investing and business for you?
So thanks, Nimesh. Thank you for inviting me. Thanks to PMS AIF. It's an absolute privilege to be on this panel with Hiren Vaid and Bharat Shaji. It's an absolute privilege. I think there's two layers of thanks one needs to extend to ASK and Alchemy, not just for the learnings that say younger fund managers like me have received from Bharat Bhai and from Hiren Bhai over the last 10 years, but also for being trailblazers, right? Had it not been for these two firms, I don't think the PMS industry would be even 1/3 the size of what it is today. So I think my Saturday morning is made by attending this session with these two legends. The assets under our care now is actually 9,000. So the question actually becomes that much more pertinent because of the speed at which the money is coming in. For the reasons both Hiren Bhai and Bharat Bhai are mentioning, the problem hasn't been very big so far, right? And I'll partly agree with what they are saying. There's a minor area where I'll disagree with them. Where I'll agree with them is I think there's a widespread misunderstanding in the country at large about how money is made in the stock market. If you look at the 10 years ending FY20, roughly $1 trillion was of wealth. The Indian stock market created around $1 trillion of wealth in the 10 years ending 2020. 80% of that $1 trillion came from just 16 companies. These 16 companies are giant wealth machines. And the names were given by Hiren Bhai and Bharat Bhai. But just to give a sense of how much opportunity there is. So what I'll just do is I published a note on this a couple of weeks back. So I'll just highlight let's take India's largest profit generator. So if you add up HDFC Bank and HDFC Bank and HDFC together is 23% of corporate India's PAT, right? They're the largest profit generators, cumulative. I'm deliberately adding them up. In the last 10 years, their total shareholder returns, CAGR, compounded returns from these two companies added up, HDFC Bank and HDFC added up, is 18%, right? 18% CAGR from the largest profit generator in the country. Now, HDFC Bank's market share in Indian banking today is, I think, 7%. Right? HDFC Bank's market share in Indian banking is 7%. HDFC's share in the Indian NBFC industry, I would say, is around 4-5%. So if anybody believes that these firms are tapped out, they're welcome to that delusional belief. But at 5-6% market share in banks and NBFCs, there's enormous amounts of growth runway. They're already compounding at 18-19%. They are the largest share, 23% of Indian PAT, and the compounding story, I think, has many more years to it. HDFC Bank market cap is $100 billion. My reckoning is a decade out. You're looking at a bank which is anywhere between 800 billion to $1 trillion, right? Now let's look at the number 2 player on that list, right? So number 2 is Reliance. Let's jump to number 3, TCS. TCS accounts for 16% of corporate India's profitability. TCS last 10 years, total shareholder return compounded is 21%. In the latest quarter, TCS generated revenue growth of 24%. Right? The results which came out last week, 24%. So it's the world's second largest IT services company. The world's largest IT services company, Accenture, reported in the latest quarter 20 deals. Just for the latest quarter, they had 20 deals of more than $100 million.
Wow.
Right? So in a global context, TCS's market share, I suspect, is around 7-8%. Right? India's third largest profit generator, 16% of corporate India's profitability. Last 10 years compounded 21% total shareholder returns. My reckoning is next 10 years as well. TCS will be a powerful money machine. These are large companies, I agree, $100 billion market cap, but their compounding engines are running at 20-25%, right? And therefore, for people like us deploying 8,000-9,000 crores, which is a small amount of money in the context of broader money management, hasn't been a problem so far, right? Now, in that context, I completely resonate with the other two gentlemen on this panel that our industry still manages small sums of money, $1, $2, $3, $4 billion, and we are privileged in our country to have machines like HDFC Bank, TCS, Bajaj Finance, Asian Paints to invest in. Where I think there is a challenge in our country is a big part of our investment community, both in PMS and in mutual funds, has done a very naughty thing. They've gone out and told the public, you want to earn more, you have to invest in small caps. That messaging that has been done has without any foundation, right? You look at BSE small cap systematically underperforms. अगर आप 10 साल का data देखो, BSE small cap has underperformed the Nifty. But because both the mutual fund industry and the PMS industry has gone out and done this messaging, the message that, Nimish, that your question contained, right, has been implanted in the public's mind.
Yeah.
So when I begin a client meeting and I talk about HDFC Bank, client says, वो सब छोड़ो, name some, 500 crore का कोई stock बोलो sir.
Next Bajaj Finance.
5% दे सके, अगला Bajaj Finance बन जाए, right? That obviously, that notion is without fact, right? The fact is the country is now dominated by 15-20 profit machines who are generating 80% of our country's wealth. But the whole investing public has been brainwashed. Unless you buy the next Bajaj Finance, your life is futile. Right? So it's I think a serious act of naughtiness. And I hope that in the next 10 years, we're able to convince that the millions of people who will head into the stock market that look at powerful compounding machines like Bajaj Finance, like Asian Paints, like HDFC Bank, don't smash your head trying to go to the Maidan and finding the next Virat Kohli, right? Invest in today's Virat Kohli, you will compound at a far better rate than looking for the next Virat Kohli. If you want to have a small part of your portfolio in a small cap investment context, that's fine. But the core of your wealth has to go into these powerhouse compounding machines whose journey is just beginning. Now the scale, let's just imagine the scale of the opportunity that is ahead of us.
Yeah.
The RBI consistently says that 95% of household wealth in our country is in real estate, the flats and gold.
Yeah.
Those asset classes, if they give you 7-8%, that's a good outcome. We are comparing those asset classes with compounding engines which consistently run out 20%. And therefore, the people who are listening to us this morning, if you're thinking about investing more in real estate and gold, I think you should rethink that. Come to the stock market. Whether you come to which fund house you go to is your prerogative. Look for sensible, high quality compounding machines. You will make 2 to 3 times more annual compounding than buying flats in wherever Noida, Gurgaon, Sarjapur, Lower Parel, Panvel, right? And that shift is what we have to see in the next 10 years. We have to financialize the $10 trillion of household wealth in our country, 9 trillion of which today lies in physical assets, which is an absolute shame for the country.
So wonderful. By answering, I mean, all three of you have answered a question which was designed for many other panelists, and you have raised the case of how big is the size of opportunity equity markets and whether we are at the peak. That was a question asked to other panelists, and indirectly you guys have answered this and put to rest the kind of opportunity available. So let me move to the second question. Maybe I'll start with Bharat Bhai again. Bharat Bhai, an all-time high of 1.42 crores demat accounts have been opened in FY21. The pandemic has given birth to do-it-yourself traders and investors who believe they can manage their own equity themselves. Request you to guide the need of investing with the professional fund management. Have you seen in your experience investor behavior like this when they jump to doing themselves? And what would you advise for them?
Whether that behavior has been seen all the time. In fact, in 80s, of the household wealth, as high as 14-15% was devoted to equities. And that number has crumbled to less than 5% today over a period of few decades. So these attempt to experiment, lure of DIY, do it yourself, maybe for thrill, maybe for feeling that one can do it, is age old, and there is nothing very surprising about it. But I think the important question to ask oneself, whether one's own money one can entrust to some whims or quirks or temperamental gambits of a kind that you want to kind of unleash on itself. Investing in equity markets is a matter of great degree of seriousness. It's not a matter of levity. It's not a matter of light-hearted fun or a thrill. And therefore, to assume that it can be done without paying due regard to the rules of the game and how to do it over a period of time, unless and until one has kind of devoted time and energy, and of course assuming that one has necessary skill set and mindset to be able to do that, that's playing with the fire. To illustrate, if you look at what brings success in investing over a period of time, first and foremost, you must have a good capability to understand which investments have a greater likelihood or a chance of succeeding. So that's first and foremost. So you need to have checklist manifesto. You need to filter out vast majority of the mediocre or non-performing businesses that are unlikely to do anything over a period of time. And therefore, you need to have a critical filtering apparatus to figure out which are the businesses which have greater probability of succeeding. Second is, it is important to understand that you are not merely buying a few individual businesses, you are creating a portfolio. Therefore, the rules of the game apply at a higher level, further at a portfolio level. So it's not a zoo or a collection of names that you build. The overall portfolio has to have its own personality and character, and that requires special set of skills, an approach, and a mindset. How do you build a portfolio of resilience, solidity, adequate diversity, at the same time adequate selectivity and concentration, so that you have built the right notion and the character around that portfolio? Therefore, portfolio character is at a higher order personality. Each individual name within the portfolio itself has to have very rigorous filters to be able to be finding a place or otherwise. Third is to realize the importance of risk control. Returns people can see. It is the risk which is hidden. And the fact that at a point of time when you're measuring returns, risk is not attacked you or risk is not visible doesn't mean risk is absent. It is just that probably one was lucky not to have the hurt from the risk. But invariably, risk will come when you keep playing with it. And therefore, real returns are risk-adjusted returns. And therefore, we have to have a clear understanding of what is the source of risk and how to mitigate it and how to tame it. And that risk is not merely in terms of the macroeconomic or a global kind of a generalized risk. It could be a risk in the business, but the most important risk is in the mind of yourself. Because your own discipline, your own temperament, your own ability to deal with the violence of the markets is a huge amount of risk. And that is something that's not easy to build. It requires innate character and innate ability to be able to deal with these challenges over a period of time. And therefore, discipline to do what is the right thing in the face of apparent adversity. And time to time, you have to be prepared to get ridiculed by the markets. And time to time, you have to be prepared to be insulted by the markets. That you may be doing right thing, and yet markets may make you look like a fool or a Johnny who probably doesn't know what he is doing. And therefore, consistently, your ability to doubt what you are doing, at the same time remain reasonably optimistic about what you are doing, both may seem seemingly contradictory ideas, but both are important to be built all the time into what you are doing. And that is something that that's not a matter of merely learning or reading about it. It's something that you to build it as a part of your DNA, as a part of your character. Finally, I would say too many times we tend to underestimate the role of larger vision, larger wisdom, larger understanding of where things are. And too many times we get carried away by very narrowness and specificity of a particular situation. And again, these particular trait is built and over a period of time. And while this may not be very elegant to say, many of these things are not very easy. Some of these things are hardwired in the nature, in the personality. And unless and until you some of the traits, for example, one of the important traits is to be a loner and yet to be engaged. When you are saying you're a loner, it doesn't mean you're a Robinson Crusoe, but to be able to stand by what you believe is right. At the same time, your ability to observe your own failures and your own weaknesses. These many of the issues goes collectively into the building of investment character, investment returns, and the portfolio performance. Narrow period comparisons, narrow period results which have been obtained by taking risk of a kind that you shouldn't be taking or which is inelegant to take. Many of these may summarize into the numbers, but do not get summarized into the quality of those numbers. And without that quality of those numbers, the reality of the picture doesn't come to your mind. And therefore, investing may look easy. And often when markets are in a go-go shape, everybody is entitled to feel like a genius. But markets were to be such a simple game, then markets would have turned up far too many more successful individuals who made money from the markets. Markets are difficult, they are unpredictable, and markets have no real reason to make you rich and wealthy. And therefore, you have to be very, very respectful of the market, earn your returns by remaining agile and respectful towards the situation. And to treat it as a trivial game or an easy game will be one of the biggest mistakes to make. But there are often periods when this realization takes time before it dawns upon people.
Such an elaborate answer. I don't think it needs further. So let me, Hiren, for you, let me take another question and merge with this. As equity managers, many times you would have very high conviction on certain sectors or companies. So in managing public money, how do you evaluate those decisions, keeping the concentration risk, the liquidity risk? So how public fund management is superior to personal fund management? Just combine the other question for you.
I think by and large, if you ask me, there shouldn't be a very large significant difference between what you would do with your own money and what you would do with that of an investor. But having said that, yes, there are certain practical issues that you need to keep in mind. For example, I have a large part of my own wealth in my own product, right? So I don't manage anything outside of that unless it's private equity or whatever else, which is not the domain of what I'm managing in. But I think that it is very important that people come to you with a certain level of expectations. And I think that the challenge is that because no investor or investor class is homogeneous, right? As Bharat said, somebody would come because right now the markets are very ebullient. Somebody would say, oh, it doesn't make there's no excitement for me to invest in a great large cap or a great business. That's all very well known. I want to find the next one. So there is no homogeneous investor. But I think as managers, what you do is that over time you establish a certain method to the madness to say that there are several ways to skin the cat, and you don't deny that this is how you don't make money. A technical analyst will say, well, I've made money for the last 10 years using charts. Fine. That's a legitimate way of making money. Today, there are a lot of new investors who are saying that I can do it myself. And there are a lot of clients that I have come across who come and say, I invested in so and so and I made so much money. But, when you tell me how much money can you make, and if we say we'll make 15, 18% compounded, somebody can scoff at you and say, well, I've done that in a manner of 6 months, or, I did better than this. And I say, well, I mean, if you're skilled enough, please, sir, go ahead, because it would be wrong on my part to presume that the other guy is not skilled enough. I mean, I have come across a lot of very smart investors who may be much more skilled than you could be, right? So why presume that? So I think our job is to say that this is our philosophy. This is our method to the madness. This is how we are going to skin the cat. And for that, you need to go and look at my 5, 10, 15, 20-year track record. And if you believe that this method has consistently produced a result which satisfies your objectives, then come to me. Otherwise, there is a whole wide world available to people. I mean, today people can go and index themselves. I mean, that's a big theory which is out there in the investing world, where people are saying that why do I even have to go to an active manager? Why don't I just go and buy an index, right? I mean, it's low cost. The index is a self-cleaning mechanism. It takes out all the garbage companies. It brings in all the great companies. So I think we need to realize two things. One is that there are several paths to spirituality, just like there are several paths to making wealth. And the investor is not one homogeneous person. People come to the market with various objectives. You got to be very clear as to where you stand. What can you deliver? What you have delivered is in black and white. And I think along the way, my view is that you tend to generally, over a long period of time, you will hang around with people who you think buy into your philosophy, right? And those who don't, are free. I mean, those who are convinced and those who buy into your way of managing money and creating wealth will stay with you naturally. And those who don't will over a period of time go, and that's fine. That's perfectly fine.
Thank you. In your answer, you preempted me how to get Saurav in this conversation. So Saurav, let me put this question differently between the passive and active investing. Your thoughts there, please.
I think we should welcome all of these people who are coming to the market, right? First of all, I don't think any of the gentlemen on this call, or indeed many of our other PMS providers, need to worry. There's so much money heading towards our industry that as India's $9 trillion of physical wealth financializes over the next decade, there'll be enormous flows into the asset management industry. But leaving flows to the asset management industry aside, I think we should welcome all of these people who are coming into the market, wo day trading kar rahe hain ya passive kharid rahe hain. I don't think we should, deter them in any shape or form. There's two reasons we should encourage all of these people. Firstly, there's a small matter of reducing the country's cost of capital, right? If you keep buying flats and keep buying gold, we stay a high cost of capital country. As we financialize people's assets, we create a double benefit. Cost of capital goes down, cost of land potentially also comes down, right? Furthermore, we are still among, if you take the world's top 10 stock markets, we're still amongst the least liquid, right? Even if retail liquidity goes up, it adds to market liquidity. It reduces price impact cost for Hiren Bhai, for Bharat Bhai, for myself. If I reduce price impact cost, I'm able to give a better return to clients. To go back to your original question, Nimesh, it's easier to manage larger sums of money. It's easier to show my clients, aapne paisa diya, I didn't generate a massive price impact, right? So all of these people are welcome. Now, everybody goes through a process of learning in life. I think the other panelists have said so. I keep asking myself, why don't people do this with cooking, right? So watching TV chefs is also a glamour industry, right? So people watch us yap on financial channels. They watch TV chefs cook up wonderful dishes on MasterChef and so on. The reason I think they don't become full-time chefs is they try it for a couple of times. The food is so awful, they decide कि ये हमारी बस की बात नहीं है, right? So they go back to ordering from wherever, Domino's or जिससे भी order करते हैं, or they hire a cook. Whereas in financial markets क्या होता है? You watch Hiren Ved talk on CNBC. You say मैं भी कर सकता हूँ, and the market runs up, and you say वो Hiren Ved कर रहा है, मैं भी कर रहा हूँ, right? And then it takes you a couple of years to realize that you can't do what a Bharat Shah or a Hiren Ved does, because there's decades of work behind it. So the feedback loop in cooking is instant, and therefore we aren't seeing a mass migration to people in Bangalore, Bombay saying, I will give up the day job and become a full-time cook, because they realize the feedback loop is instantaneous and the food is not so good. But the feedback loop in financial markets takes perhaps a couple of years. So they will learn in due course. In the meantime, let's keep encouraging this whole journey, improving liquidity in our system, financializing our physical assets, bringing down cost of capital, and taking the country forward. And all of that is good for us because it allows us to manage larger sums of money with lower impact on trading commissions, on trading costs and price impact cost.
Wonderful.
Index investing, I have a point to it. And while I have been an active manager all through, and hopefully will remain so, but I see nothing incongruous about index investing. I think it's a very legitimate way of participating in the wealth creation process. And judging by the records of so many managers all over the world, there is an overwhelming probability that index investing would do a better job than most of the active managers that are around. Therefore, creating superior returns is a matter of a bit more distinguished skill, a bit more extra skill. Even within the investing world, to be able to create a superiority of returns over a meaningful period of time and to generate that meaningfully superior return is a matter not of trivial proportion. It is something which requires sufficient degree of special skills to be combined and all of them together to produce that result over a period of time. Therefore, there is a merit about index investing, because think of it from the perspective of an average individual who has limited sums to put it around to work. And if he doesn't have ability to figure out whom to entrust that money, then I think if they can't find out who is a good manager, without significant efforts at their end, then it becomes like throwing a dart. And rather than throwing a dart and landing in a wrong place, it is better to put that money into the index. At least it will basically produce index returns minus minimal cost that is there and minus taxation that is an incidence on that, which is a good enough result, But fortunately, there are enough managers on the other side who have shown that there is a method, there is a process, there is a way to do it. It's not a cookie cutter thing that you put something into the plug and energy starts flowing. It reveals itself over a period of time. But if you're willing to be patient, it does reveal and does show sufficiently gratifying results as superior returns for one to remain committed to active investing.
This has been one of the most educational sessions for me, and I'm sure for all the investors. We have still a couple of questions, so I'll not now ask anybody. I'll just put the question and request anyone of the three to share your thoughts there. There's one question which is there on, as on 31st March 2021, 92% of the funds were underperforming the benchmark. Now, most of the investors and distributors have been very tough and demanding on the fund manager for continuous outperformance. Could you guide and share your thoughts on how an investor should measure his performance? Is it relative? Is it absolute? Is it outperformance or benchmark? How should he do? Because I think there needs to be an education for the investor, and I leave it to any one of you to take it up first.
It's subject close to my heart, so I'll like to make a comment or two. To my mind, investing is absolute. The purity of investing is all about absolute. Ultimately, we invest to improve our odds of success and to make actual returns. We don't invest for an intellectualizing exercise. So there is a meaningful purpose to be achieved of actually creating wealth and actually creating meaningful growth of the capital. Ultimately, what is investing all about? That you spend something today in the hope of getting something higher tomorrow. And the difference between what you get tomorrow and what you pay today is the returns that you make. And therefore, there is no Samaritan reason why you're investing. You're investing because you want to create value. And therefore, purity of investing has to be about absolute. I have no confusion about it. The trouble with the relative part is, while I'm not dismissing relative part, relative to indices, to the managers, to the peer set, or whatever are meaningful comparisons, and it is a mirror before you time to time, and it's an important mirror to uphold before yourself. But the trouble with relativity is that they tend to be backward looking, because by definition, any comparison can only be of the past, and investing is anything but the past. Investing, most of it is into future. Therefore, no matter what you do, that comparison itself is flawed. Second problem with the relativity is that typically it tends to be short term, and investing is anything but short term. And therefore, unfortunately, all kind of comparisons suffer from utter kind of inanity to mediocrity to utter idiocy at times. People compare for weeks and months. I mean, nothing can be more, let me not use any word on that, but nothing can be more silly than doing those kind of things. The beauty about it is when you pursue absolute with purity, with a due devotion, with full panache and intensity, relative happens as a byproduct. You don't have to hunt for relative as a necessary attribute every single day. Over a period of time, with the patience and the right kind of patience, when you pursue the purity of absolute, relative happens as a byproduct automatically. And if you are a good absolute manager, relative superiority also will be of a significant variety. And that's where I think, to my mind, the real answer lies.
Wonderful. Anyone wants to add a thought or?
I'll just give an anecdote in this regard. So I think just reflecting Bharat Bhai's last point. So as you know, right, we decided to call our product Consistent Compounders PMS. So we launched the business 3 years ago. So initially, a few clients signed us up. Then every evening, right, if in the preceding 24 hours we'd underperformed the Nifty, there would be a lady who would email me saying, you underperformed the Nifty in the last 24 hours. Why have you underperformed the Nifty? So obviously we were new and we thought Sara question answer karna chahiye. We responded, right? Then after a few days, I called her and asked her, ma'am, why do you drop us this mail every time we underperform the Nifty in the last 24 hours? She said, no, your PMS is called Consistent Compounders. So every day, I think you should be beating the Nifty. So it took me a while to understand the power of her thinking, right? And then I had to explain to her that, look, it is not the goal. We are not trying to beat the Nifty every hour, every 24 hours, every week, every month, or even in a year. If we keep doing the right thing, over time, we will beat the Nifty, right? And she accepted it. Uske baad se she didn't email us. But a lot of people out there who keep looking last 3 months mein kya aaya hai, last 3.5 months mein kya aaya hai, obviously over some horizon or the other, you will outperform, and over some horizon or the other, you're underperforming. I don't think we raise, and if you look at it from a very real life perspective, I don't think we raise our children saying, beta, you have to grow up and be first in school. I think we raise our children saying, we'll do the best we can for you, give you a good education. If you set the fundamentals right, you will be a prosperous, successful citizen of the world. I think investing is like that. You nurture your stocks, you invest in your stocks like they are your own children. You're not trying to beat somebody in a daily race. And if you do the fundamentals right, you outperform. Remember, by definition, Nimish, if companies are driving 80% of the wealth created in a market, probability suggests that only a handful of fund managers will have the bulk of that 16 in their portfolio. The probability suggests that 80-90% will underperform. So I think Spiva publishes these things every month, and it's great drama. If newspapers pick it up, 80-90% fund managers have underperformed. The same is true in the US market. US market maybe 10 company wealth create karte. So as soon as you have a polarized market, which is the nature of the modern economy, technology means you'll polarize the economy. By definition, 80-90% underperform. That creates great headlines, but it is not no great purpose to know that.
So I think we will almost have been messaged that we're coming to the end of the session.
Just a small little point there. Yeah. Unless you happen to be a Bernie Madoff, meaningfully long period of time in any meaningful career, there'll be periods when you'll have to suffer the humiliation, and you'll have to suffer the inanities and indignities of the market. So there is no shame about it so long as you are doing the right things.
Okay, lovely. So this just mentioned by Kamal that it's so insightful session that we can have the 2 questions pending here. Maybe one of you, anyone can answer. There are one more concern which nowadays is coming up very high, and maybe sort of anybody can do. A lot of investors don't feel comfortable paying fund management fees. I think this is going on for long. So what are your views on the fund management fees? How can it be more aligned with the investor interest? Plus, there always has been comparison with the mutual funds and its asset classes. So any thoughts on how should, investor look at the fees? Because that's been one of the conversations most times.
Marcellus, we've been through a full cycle on this. So in our first year, right, I remember first year, 80% of clients who came, they said, we are not going to pay fixed fees. We only want to pay variable fees. And we said, that's fine. After 3 years, I can see that those people who came 3 years ago, 70% have switched to fixed fees on their own accord, right? It's not as if I called them up and said, switch kar jao, right? So when they are new, right, and because they come with all these newspaper headlines behind them saying you underperform, fixed fees, लूट लेगा आपको, etc. So initially there's this skepticism, and they come and say, I want to pay variable fees. After 3 years, they say, I want to pay fixed fees, and we don't mind either way. And I think the good thing about the PMS industry, and it shares this with the AIF industry, we are allowed to charge fixed fees. Where I think the challenge is greater is, PMS and AIF, we're allowed to charge variable fees. The challenge is greater in the mutual fund piece because they can't charge performance fees. But most investors I've seen, as I said, my practical experience is 70% of people are happy to pay fixed fees, not variable fees. And hence the concern on fees, at least my practical experience has been, it's a lot lower. What clients are after is a decent return. You give them that, they're happy to pay fixed fees.
I just have one advice for Saurabh, because I've gone through this 18 years ago. He's going through it now.
Right.
We always used to have on day one a menu card. You have a fixed fee and you have a performance-based fee, and you leave it to the client, right? Because, and we've seen this cycle, Saurabh, because when you have a very strong 3 years and he ends up paying a performance fee, he wants to switch to the fixed fee.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? And then when the markets are not so great and not compounding for a while, he wants to then align to a lower fixed fee and a higher performance fee. And I can tell you, this is because this is, data of the last 18 years, that this range for us has stayed between 45, 55, 40, no matter what you do.
Interesting.
Its range has been between 45, 55 range for the last 18 years that we've been managing, right? So I think the best thing to do here is that, you can keep, there's no point directing anybody towards A or a B fee structure. You offer a fair fee for your services and give them a menu card and say, look, you want to come and have an idli, you'll have a idli. You want to have a dosa, please have a dosa.
Right.
For me, both is available and both are good. We stick to a minimum standard quality, and this is what you will get for that quality. If you want ambience, quality, etc., this is what you get for this price. Now, if you don't compare me with a guy thelawala standing outside and saying, "Hey, I can give you an idli on a pom-pom cycle," fair enough, you can go there, but then you get that price, right? So I think that's a very, I just wanted to share our experience over the last 18 years on this.
Wonderful wisdom there. Quality always comes at price, and professional fund management also comes at price. So you choose from the menu card as I can take. Just this last question, because so much education has been there, and I want to turn the tables, because most time investors and distributors have been very demanding on fund managers in terms of what they should do, what they should not do, and so on and so forth. Today, I want you guys to share, one of you, in terms of what are the traits or qualities of a good investor. If they want to become a good investor, what are the traits they should develop? And I think this has been a session where investors can take a lot of things back. Anyone can just chip in terms of your thoughts of becoming a good investor in equity markets.
Well, first thing, I think there are traits of the science kind, and then there are traits of the art kind. And both are important. Therefore, there is some amount of mathematics and some amount of English, the grammar of the investing that you need to get it right. But important traits, first and foremost, is the disciplined mind. Unless and until you have a mind which is stable, which is calm enough to not react, but to respond, and to respond with a due degree of thoughtfulness. Unless and until there is that degree of stable mind, a reflective mind, a thoughtful mind, investing is not an easy activity to achieve. The second is, as I mentioned earlier, the ability to suffer insults, because investing time to time will make you look like a fool, even when you do the right things. And even when you do the right things, when you are suffering an indignity, there'll be times when legitimately you deserve an insult and you suffer an insult. But there are also occasions when you should deserve an insult, but you get away with it. But time to time, you may still do the right thing, and you may not be treated very kindly by the market prices. I think an ability to suffer that phase, an ability to deal with again is a very important attribute to have. Third, market is not a popularity machine. And therefore, if your idea of doing a distinguished job is to contest the popularity contest, then you are unlikely to win the game. There'll be times when you'll need to be a loner, and there'll be times when you need to stand apart, not out of any misplaced sense of arrogance or any egoistic mind, but genuinely when you think that you need to stand aside or you need to stand apart, you need to be able to do that. And if you can't do that, then markets make a mincemeat out of it. Fourth, I would say, which is related to what I just now said, is independent mind. An ability to take a view while listening to many other views, contrary, supportive, critical, whatever other views, absorbing them, digesting them, giving them a fair churning within the mind, and yet taking a view and a decision which you think is right and which is in the interest. Apart from that, of course, ability to understand businesses, ability to distinguish good businesses from the bad ones, ability to make judgments about people, the good ones and the bad ones. The bad ones abound, and therefore, relatively, it's like filtering away a lot of dross to get your gold dust which is left behind. And finally, ability to value the businesses. And that's not a matter of just mathematics. Ability to value businesses of a much larger ability to take a 360-degree view of not just past and present, which is a small part, but of a great degree of future. And that means uncertainty, and that means risk, and that means ability to weave in all that into your valuation capability. Ability to value and act upon it is the finale.
I think I've just got a message that we completed. I would have loved to hear. I didn't realize we actually have completed 1 hour of time. To sum up the whole what Bharat said, you instead of doing all of that effort, take time to choose the professional manager of your choice, rather than doing it yourself. And that would be my message to the investor as we end this. I must say this recording probably is going to be heard by the investors again and again, because there's a pearls of wisdom about how to manage their money. And thank you, all three gentlemen, for this wonderful pearls of wisdom. And over to Aishwarya.
Thanks PMSAF. Thanks Bharat. Thanks Saurabh. Thanks Nimesh.
Thank you, everybody.
Nimesh, sir?
Good to see all of you again.